Hello, and thank you for downloading this bonus episode of Discussing Documentaries today with myself, Matt Wills, and everyone's favourite Geordie who wasn't a professional footballer, Rick Wharton. The pair of us are honoured to be joined by journalist, pinball fan, TED talker, all-round nice patient geezer and filmmaker Mr. Seth Porges, who co-directed Class Action Park. Now, this follows on from episode 49 of Discussing Documentaries, Class Action Park, which I absolutely loved. So, without further ado, I give you Mr. Seth Porges and Rick. So, first of all, Seth, I just wanted to start. I'm going to throw my esteemed colleague under the bus here. So, sorry that it took us so long to get back to you on Twitter.
No problem.
No, we are terrible on social media. Rick, why don't you pick this one up?
That was the shock of the month. So I got told about a week ago that you'd sent us a nice message. I was like, that is amazing. And you said you'd like to do a show. Then 2 days later, after me boasting about that, Matt goes, yeah, that was a month ago. We haven't got back to him.
Unbelievable. No, I can't tell you guys how much fun I had listening to your episode about Class Action Park. It was like seeing something with fresh eyes, just like the uncontrollable laughter brought warmth to my heart. So thank you so much.
Oh, cool. Because it is hands down. So as I put in my tweet, that is the funniest documentary I've ever watched. And I was thinking about other funny things I've watched. The only time I've laughed that much when I've watched something was when I watched, in 1983, I watched Delirious with Eddie Murphy. And then in 2012, I watched The Bitter Buddha with Eddie Pepitone. And you ticked that tickle button on me, and I just couldn't stop laughing. But on the other side of it, man, that was a miserable documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, it was incredibly sad. And I think that's why it was so funny, because you got the balance between, the sadness of the entire place coupled with, as you said, the nostalgia of, oh, is it all great? No, it weren't. People died. It was really horrible thing.
Yeah. And that's what we wanted. That's very much what we wanted to do, was because I think if we had just gone on to this project and treat it like a news program where like the sobering truth is there from the beginning and it's very sad and very tragic, it wouldn't have been as impactful and it wouldn't have been about anything except these events that were there. But by kind of building up the myth of Action Park, I think it allowed us to sort of show the dirty truth underneath it with much more power. And also because it is funny. Like, you can't deny that this is a hilarious place. It's super absurd that any of this actually happened. I think what becomes apparent as you watch the movie, especially as you get to the end, is that all of these people who are looking back and laughing at, they're not laughing at necessarily because they think it's a joke. They're laughing about it because it's a kind of laughter that occurs when your brain just short circuits and there's no other response, right? And to some degree, it's a defense mechanism. And I think you have to acknowledge that's how we as humans sort of cope with tragedy often, or dark things, is laughter, and not make people feel bad about that. Like, you have a right to laugh about things that are truly messed up.
I think that comes across. I literally just rewatched it again today. So to go back and rewatch a documentary in such a short space of time, it's still held up for me.
I appreciate that.
I'm not just saying that, but from a narrative point of view, it's literally like, for me, it was like almost on the hour mark is where it skids to a halt, of being like, the sketch show of how wild the 80s were to, and here's the consequence.
Yeah, and I'll say, even, I've seen the movie 1,000 times because as we edited and we worked on it, you watch these movies again and again and again, and up until the first hour or so, it never got old to me. And I don't say that from a place of like somebody admiring his own work, because that humor isn't mine. It's what our contributors had. It's what they brought to the table. And so I feel like I can say, that stuff's hilarious. Those people are genius, and not really bask in my own work. I was just blown away by what a lot of those people brought to the table and what they said to us. I mean, to this day, I'm like, that is some amazing insight and funny stuff people said.
Oh, and the disposition of those contributors, like the park staff, look like sitcom characters themselves.
Yes.
Even in
Well, to kind of lean into cliche here, New Jersey is a character. Like the people who are from New Jersey, it's not just about this park. It's about what it's like to grow up in this time and in this place, and what happens to these people. You know, one of the things I found so interesting was spending some time in Vernon, spending some time talking to people who grew up going to or working at this park, who experienced deep trauma, you know, who saw some really messed up stuff. I became very interested in, like, what does that do to these people? What are they like now, a couple decades later? And you realize, like, these people, they're a hardy bunch. They're have a very kind of like gallows, dark sense of humor, but they're kind of a joy to be around, because if you can survive like a childhood at Action Park, nothing else is ever going to bother you as you grow up. Nothing else.
There is about 6 elements that could, like, since doing this podcast, we've watched about 4 documentaries a week.
Sure.
So the scope of what I appreciate of what you cover in this, because just the child labor laws that's flaunted within this, and how the staff are running wild at that young age, could in itself just be an hour-long thing with consequences.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we could have like pulled out. I mean, that's an episode. Let's stretch this thing out. But I really love the idea of, you know, we made it a brief documentary. It wasn't like a 6-part series or 10-part series. It's a tight 90 minutes. And I think it really benefits from that, because people are watching it again and again. You know, they're able to watch it and then share it with their partner, share it with their friend, and not feel like they're gotta sit down for 6 straight hours. And it becomes this enclosed experience. In the same way, you know, people have like written me and said, like, I've watched, it's like it's Star Wars where they're counting how many times they've seen it. Like, I've seen it 34 times. I'm like, really? Thank you. That's awesome. Because it kind of feels like this movie, I mean, we self-produced the film before we were lucky enough to find, you know, a home in the United States, HBO Max, end up in Sky in the UK. And it really feels like our basement album we recorded with our band, kind of like picked up by a major label. So it's really, really cool to see that. I think we touched a nerve with people. And I think the kind of DIY nature of the film, I think, gives it some heart. I think it kind of like shows through. It doesn't feel overly polished. I think that's really important for this movie, because, you know, a lot of it's just old home movies and like party clips and stuff. And you want it to kind of feel still in that same vein and that same, you know,
I found it initially on the back of just flicking through YouTube, and I saw an advert for, I think it might have been the first, because you did a 15-minute film, didn't you, back in 2013? Yes. And I think I saw that about a year or it must have been a year and a half ago at least. And I went, that's going to be awesome. Let me see more of that. And when it popped up on my Sky feed, I think we recorded it about 3 days later. Because our tastes are so different, Rick really doesn't like my choices, because I'm very upbeat and I want have you seen a documentary called The Barkley Marathons?
No, sounds like I should have.
Allow me to save you some time there, Seth. You're cool.
No, okay, sounds like I should have.
But it's about this insane, crazy race in America. And I found it so uplifting. And Rick hates stuff like that. So when I suggested this, his face just dropped. And then after he saw it, he went, yeah, okay, you've redeemed yourself in my eyes. I'm just it was just because it touched every single thing I think you need in a documentary. From the misery to the happiness and it was, like you said, it was a tight 90 minutes.
Yeah. And it was, to us, it was about, you know, it's so interesting. The thing that people talk about the most in our movie is the kind of rather stark tonal shift that occurs, you know, 2/3 of the way through the film, where it goes from being very upbeat and funny and fun to very dark, and it happens very quickly. And to us, you know, people like it's interesting kind of reading or hearing people's responses, because some people aren't a big fan of that. Some people really do like it, but I think it hits people hard. And I think a lot of people kind of go into this movie wanting it just to be kind of like a comedy. And we don't really want to let people get off too easy. The kind of what we wanted to do is make people laugh, make this absurdity very apparent, but then make people kind of question what they were laughing about, and make them feel bad about what their own laughter. And to us, that was really the feeling I wanted to kind of get, because Action Park, for people who are familiar with it before our film came out, had become this kind of like urban myth, this joke almost, right? And we wanted, and it's a joke because it's funny, but we wanted people to say like, okay, if you're going to laugh about this, you kind of know what you're actually laughing about. But first, we wanted to make you laugh. Yeah,
I think one of the things was the editing on it, because when a documentary doesn't have too much. Now, I didn't realize you were even in it, sorry, until I rewatched it today. And obviously, when you were
as little as possible. I wish I wasn't.
You can tell there's been a year in lockdown between the difference of how he looks doing this video now. So.
Yeah, right now, but I've gotten a little locked in hermit beard going on right now.
We're cool keeping this audio. We look like that normally, even if we were successful.
Sure.
So, but it's like when you don't have a lot of the footage of the things you're talking. So you have footage of the rides and how crazy they look, but you don't have the accent. I think the way you've used the animation to keep it along and almost dehumanize it, not to dehumanize it, but it keeps it a lot lighter.
No, to create emotional distance is what it is. I mean, it's exactly right. Like the purpose, the animations were fun, but they were very deliberate in what we used them for, and that was to not just show things we didn't have footage of, because a lot of what we show with the animation were things we did have footage of, but to really bring people into, these animations were modeled after Saturday morning cartoons.
Yes.
I don't know what they call them in the UK, but things like Schoolhouse Rock, even Sesame Street, and just for like and so people were like, those animations were really poorly done, was one of the criticisms. I'm like, have you ever watched a Saturday morning cartoon? It's just like mistakes. Our animator actually intentionally created like mistakes to kind of like bring it in, to make it feel authentic and to make it feel real. Like you're just turning on the TV as a 9-year-old in the 80s and kind of seeing what's on there. And also, yes, to create this emotional space so that you had almost permission to laugh at it because it wasn't fully real. And then the minute the deaths are introduced into the film, that's when the animations stop. Because that's us kind of saying like, okay, here now it's real. Now you guys got to know like what we're animating. Here's the truth. Is sort of the idea.
Can I ask, how did you? So you had Chris Gethard in the first short film, the 15-minute one that this film became. How did you get him? Was it just simply a case of asking him?
Yeah. He's awesome. So he'd it's Gethard, I'll say. It looks like Gethard, which is really funny. But he had talked about and written about Action Park before. He had previously written for a publication called Weird New Jersey, which everybody should look into, which is sort of the trailblazers in terms of covering the myth of what Action Park had become. It's a really interesting site, just about website and magazine, just about weird stuff in New Jersey, whether it's Action Park or who knows what else, right? And he had written for that in a past life about Action Park. And so he was somebody who I knew was familiar with, and I think he had spoken about in one of his comedy albums. He had a lot to say about it. And he was just sort of the breakout star of the original short film I did in 2013. And I knew when we kind of came back for the feature, we had to have him back just because he had such an incredible insight into it. And it was really interesting kind of talking to him for both, because I could sort of see just like my own perspective on the park had evolved a lot in the past 7 yeand the short really was only the first hour of our film, in a sense of like, this is a ludicrous, hilarious, weird place. And so I think the film to some degree was sort of trying to reflect my own emotional journey, which was, I thought this place was absurd and funny. And then I started talking to people who got hurt there, and my attitude shifted very, very, very quickly. And we wanted to kind of create that same experience with viewers of the movie, to kind of feel what I had felt, this exuberance, this fun, this absurdity, and then kind of be brought back to earth, and then look at what you've been laughing about and feel very weird about it. And I think Chris also had somewhat shifted his perspective of it. So when he came in for the interview, it was a very hilarious interview, but also very sobering.
Yeah.
And he came ready to talk a lot about just the general experience of growing up in New Jersey and how Action Park wasn't this island. It was sort of a reflection of this general apocalyptic, self-destructive world everybody had lived in.
I remember growing up in the 80s, and I still have this feeling now when I go on the London Underground, because there was a constant threat of nuclear war that you'd see on the TV. I still love the idea of being on the London Underground, because I always think, well, I'll be safe there. I mean, you're not, but just that idea of growing up with that hanging over your head. And at the end of our street, we had and I don't know if this reflects the area I lived in, but I lived in East London. We had a nuclear bunker at the end of our street. And just the fact that you had that at the time you're growing up, as well as all the numerous wars that were going on. Yeah, it was just, I think there's part of it. I think that's quite traumatic looking back of having that, you know.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons the movie hit a nerve with folks like you who are not from New Jersey, who didn't grow up going to Action Park, was because there's something universal, at least for that generation, universal about growing up with a sense of not feeling safe, you know, kind of hanging over your head. If you didn't grow up, or not being well supervised for that matter. If you didn't grow up going to Action Park, you might have grown up sneaking into abandoned quarries or factories or doing all sorts of other stupid things that were ill-advised and perhaps dangerous, or you just generally felt like, I'm going to die at any moment, which is something, unfortunately, that a lot of people kind of grow up feeling. And what does that do to you? What does fun become when you kind of have that feeling? Because you're still a kid, right? You're still trying to have fun. But when you have this level of almost cynicism that occurs when you feel like I could die at any moment or nothing matters, what does that do to your experience growing up? And what does that do to your thrill-seeking and fun-seeking behaviors that are natural to every young person?
Yeah.
And I think that's why the movie struck a nerve. Is I think a lot of people look back at their own childhoods. Maybe they didn't have proper supervision. Maybe they were doing stupid things, dangerous things. Maybe they have friends who got hurt or even killed. And I think they see some of their own childhoods in action.
Oh, you hit Matt's nostalgia bone. When we recorded the episode, he's like one of the kids from Stranger Things by the time we came on to log on to do this. So, Seth, did you go to Action Park? Were you from Jersey yourself?
Yeah. I'm not from Jersey. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. But I went to Action Park. You know, it's like a 5 or 6 hour drive. My dad's from Jersey, so we'd find our way up those parts every once in a while. We grew up going to a bunch of amusement parks, though. So, you know, we went to like Disney World, Universal Studios, Six Flags, all those places, and only went to Action Park a couple times. And I think because of that, because I was super young when I went there, it really implanted itself in my head as this mystery, as a sense. As I got older, I had these memories of truly insane things, like a water slide that goes in a loop, or just the general sense of chaos and violence and disorder that was in the air. As I got older, I had a tough time almost believing my memories because it didn't square with like my notion of what reality is, right? And so one of the big because as you get older, you look back and you're like, was that a real memory, or was that something I saw on The Simpsons? Yeah. Was that real, or was that something like I read in a comic book, right? Like it becomes a little fuzzy and difficult. And I started looking online about Action Park as I got older and realized there was almost nothing out there in terms of journalism, just like these myths, these legends. And that to me, you know, I was a journalist. I was like, I got to look into this. I got to almost fact check my memories. And so
comparing it to when you go into Six Flags, Disney World, and you go these.
Well, yeah, especially because when you go to these places very young, it's very difficult for you as a kid to discern what's actually dangerous and what's sort of part of the storyline, right? Like you go into Tower of Terror, they tell you this elevator is going to crash. And as a kid, you're really scared because it feels real. But as an adult, you can say that's fantasy. But when you're really young, you have a hard time telling them apart. So when you go to an amusement park that's actually dangerous, it's really hard for you to tell how that's any different from one in which the thrill is part of a story, right? And so that's what it becomes, you know, the dangerous part of the artifice, we say in the movie, for places like Disney World, whereas Action Park, it was real, but as a kid, you can't tell the difference. And I think as we get older now, we look back, we say, that's unbelievable, but as a kid, you just don't even know.
And do you have a conversation with your parents now? And do you say to your mum and dad, why on earth would you take your child who you say you love? I have
had that exact conversation. So before this was a short film, I actually gave a lecture on sort of the history of Action Park. And as part of that, I had recorded a phone call with my mom where I asked her, like, and it was really, I should find the audio and actually send it to you guys. It's probably on my computer somewhere. But she basically said, she's like, well, you know, it seemed like based on the TV commercials, this great place to bring your family. I'm like, okay. That explains the first time we went.
Fool me once.
Yeah, because once you get there, like it's no secret what this place is. I mean, as a kid, you can't tell a difference, I say, but still, like, people around you are in real time calling it accident park, traction park, class action park. They're pointing at water slides and saying some kid got stuck in that one, some kid got decapitated on that one. It's all in the air in real time. Never mind just like the drunken disorder chaos that's on top of it, or the fact that nobody operating a ride can grow a mustache. It just becomes like so painfully obvious. I mean, I remember being there as like a 6-year-old with my dad and him joking like, "Oh yeah, they call this place Accident Park." Like, why are we here?
Just about to go down the Alpine Slide. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
No, and then you go to the top of the Alpine Slide and they literally have pictures of like injuries and dismembered bodies as a warning sign. And then you go down. At that point, they should have them before you go up to the ski lift, because, this is New Jersey in the 80s. If you're taking that ski lift back down, you're never living that off. That's it. That's, you're whatever for the rest of your life at that point.
Were there any staff that you got hold of who used to work there who said, "Yeah, I want to be in this documentary," and then you spoke to them and then they went, actually you can't run any of this. I've changed my mind"? Because it triggered them in some way.
Nobody who spoke to it. I think that's what's so astonishing about this place, is how people who grew up going there and working there look back at it simultaneously with fondness and horror. And how these feelings coexist. And I think that to us was sort of the great emotional truth that Action Park sort of unveils, is this way in which people, particularly people who grew up in this era, can simultaneously look back at their childhoods and say, we did these insane things, these incredible things, these dangerous things. They were awesome. I'm so glad I did that stupid thing. But as I get older, that was kind of messed up, and that shouldn't have been allowed. And how those feelings can coexist, where you can simultaneously feel this fondness and gratitude and excitement at the things you did, and also this sense of horror about it. And that's confusing to people. And I think some people wanted the movie to kind of firmly say this place was good or this place was bad, when that's like saying to somebody your childhood was good or your childhood was bad, when it was both. It was both.
There was I'm going to the staff. There was one guy who told a story, and exactly what you said about the, the fun to the dark, and then the different evolution of it. But he was telling a story about basically drowning new members of staff, and you can see
in the hazing.
It almost seemed like he hadn't told that story for a while, and then realized with adult eyes, going, "Yeah, so there's some things we did. We felt bad, but
like there's things we don't talk about. We don't think about." Like, Let's not talk about it. The grave pool with the death zone and the death chair. That's normal. You guys have a death chair when you were growing up, right? Like, that's normal. And there's so much, this movie, people like, we could have made an alternate cut of this movie in which there was just totally different stories. Everybody has so many stories. There's so much stuff that was in the film that we could just go on for hours about, like, an example being, because everybody loves a good Action Park story. All these rides were on their surface very dangerous, but almost all of them, the employees had figured out ways to make the ride even more extreme and more dangerous. And sometimes they would charge guests extra for the privilege of these more extreme ways of enjoying the ride. So the Alpine Slide, they had special carts, the white carts, in which the employees would basically file down the wheel. So they would go extra fast. And the employees would use those, and they would charge guests like $20 or something to take a more extreme version of the ride down, which is just wow. Oh, cliff dive. There were trees at the top of the cliff dive, and I have photos of employees jumping off the extra 15 foot of the tree over the cliff dive to gain another 10 or 15 feet.
I bet that was mainly men trying to impress girls, because we'll do anything to impress a girl, right? And I'll jump off that.
Probably. I'll say the photo I saw was of a man jumping off the tree. So you might be right. But there was, everything had this just like heightened way of riding it. And on its surface, these things were already stupid dangerous. But then, it's like, we'll take the racing car. They're not go-karts, they're racing cars. Like this, they were made by Lola, which made Formula One racing cars. And these things really, if you had the only thing keeping them from going 90 miles per hour was that the track was curved, right? So then they could take it onto the highway and go these straightaways, and racing cars on the highway. What could go wrong? And of course, my favorite lines in the movie is where somebody says, the design of the racing cars was flawed because it was right next to the beer tent.
Yeah. The way the park is drawn up, you've got all the slides in the water park, but as you're watching how crazy the slides are, I was like, I can't wait until I get to Mortar World. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's another world. There's a Mortar World.
Kids in speedboats. Yes. Let's see what these guys did, and then the battle tanks. I've never heard or seen anything like that.
Oh, so we did a drive-through screening of the film when it came out, and we found a guy who had actual action park ride vehicles. So we brought by to the screening one of the speedboats, one of the racing cars, and one of the tanks. And so I got a photo kind of sitting in the tank, and I tell you, man, like you feel the ghost in that thing. I was like, this ride just felt so awesome. It's the kind of ride I feel like somebody could do, right? Where you're just in a freaking battle tank shooting balls. It sounds like fun, right?
It sounded incredible. But like, even when you say someone had these, you don't know if he got them at an auction or if he just drove them down the highway.
Oh, there's a story that would take me way too long to go into about how there's a bunch of people in New Jersey who have their hands on a bunch of old action park ride vehicles. But that's a story for another day. And what's great about those, so if you're like a collector and you buy, say, like a Disneyland ride vehicle, like a Space Mountain card, in which there's collectors who collect these things, you can't ride that thing anywhere unless you have Space Mountain, right? Like, it's a roller coaster card. It's useless without the coaster. The action park rides, you can ride them. You can take a boat into a pool. You can take the speedboat onto wherever, the race car. These things are usable without any sort of track. And that's what's so cool about those things. You can actually experience the ride.
I did like the bloke who said, he went, yeah, we removed the limiters. Of course I took it on the highway. They would get up to 60 miles an hour. As if, well, why wouldn't you? That was the obvious, that was the next evolutionary step. It was people like me who suggested we eat oysters. That's how mankind evolved, because of people like me.
Through trial and error and natural selection. Truly. I mean, a lot of these ride ideas were similarly like, why wouldn't we try this idea? Let's just see what happens, kind of thing, and just see what happens. And it really was, people look at these things and they look mad, many of these rides, but you have to imagine this was in the early days of the water park, the concept of the water park. We didn't know what a water park was. And so a lot of these ride ideas, they look like just early prototype versions of rides you'd find elsewhere, still figuring out the kinks.
Yeah, of all of them, it's the Alpine Slide, or the concrete slide down under the. I can feel.
It was actually mostly made of asbestos.
I can feel friction burns just looking at that. Every clip of it makes me just.
Well, and that was not an uncommon occurrence. We're saying the film that on a busy weekend there would be literally hundreds of people injured on just that one ride alone. That was the ride that every day in and day out, which is injuring people. I mean, this wasn't a film, but the film director Judd Apatow tweeted that the screaming he had Steve Carell produce in the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin when he gets his chest waxed in that famous scene was inspired by the screaming he heard coming from the Alpine Slide in Finland when people were getting sprayed at Action Park. And so I found that amazing. I met Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, and he tweets about Action Park on occasion because he grew up going there. And I mentioned to him, and he just starts lifting up his pant leg and showing me his scars from the Alpine Slide. It was something where it was a rather significant percentage of people who went to Action Park not only have, but will with a smile show you their Alpine Slide scars to this day.
It's incredible. I've got one or two nerdy questions for you. I'm not sure how long I've got you for.
Whatever you want, man.
One of the things they talk about in the area they refer to the Playboy Bunny Club and the McAfee. Is that the John McAfee Ranch when he was on his first terror?
No. So McAfee was the name of sort of a
right.
That's all it was. So nothing to do with John.
I was going to say, just to put all that crazy in one area.
Yeah, the Playboy Club, it was right next to the park. And I think for a while they were going to build like a monorail that would connect the two. I don't think that ever got built. But it's kind of amazing because they threw this Playboy Club. This was just a small town that suddenly had all this interest from developers wanting to turn it into like in Orlando or Las Vegas. So they built a Playboy Club. If you watch the movie, the Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder movie, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, a lot of it is filmed at that Playboy Club.
Right.
You can see the structure there. But it's just kind of taking this small town New Jersey, and then, what job do you have for the summer? You either work at Action Park or you're a Playboy bunny. It's just like what it was, just kind of thrown in the middle there.
Oh man, that's good. I was going to say, I literally just watched Gringo the other day, so I did that name the minute I reheard it. Just thought, is that all right? So
Yeah.
In regards to, so we get this on Sky over here, and is HBO its own streaming service, or is part of a cable package over your way?
So in the US, HBO both exists as a streaming service and as a cable channel, but our movie was released on HBO Max, which is sort of the streaming service.
Right.
So it was just on the streaming service. And I'm actually very curious. I haven't seen how it's been shown on Sky, but the runtime appears to be a couple minutes shorter. So I'm very curious if, due to maybe legal reasons or whatever else, a couple things were trimmed. I don't know. I'd be very curious what you guys are missing out. So maybe try to find the US version.
All right, yeah.
Oh, there's an extra cut. Oh, so, brilliant. All right.
How is
director's cut?
So is that literally, because HBO has got a lot of, as I imagine, there's a lot of street cred, because all the great American shows that come over here are all HBO. Yeah. So
yeah,
when you got that logo, that's like a stamp of approval over here. But is there a chance that will end up elsewhere, or is that with HBO on there for time? Is there a licensing?
In the US, its home is HBO Max. There's a chance that at some point they could decide to license it out or show it somewhere else or whatnot. But it's great because it's a streaming service that anybody can get their hands on, and if they don't want to subscribe, there's a free trial. So watch our movie and keep
And when you were making the film, when you have those, you must get moments of doubt as a person who creates stuff. Even as a journalist, you must be writing sometimes going, is this good? When you're doing this during this documentary, how did you overcome those moments of doubt? Now, I know you co-directed it, but did you keep picking one another up? Because I have incredible doubts, and Rick's always like, it's going to be okay, right? He is literally carrying me half the time. It's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. It's okay. I'm like, really?
Well, the hardest thing about making a movie, I think, is just the number of times you have to watch it, and you kind of get lost about like what's interesting, what's emotionally resonant, what's whatever. Because by the time you watch a movie 400 times, it's hard to almost envision how somebody watching it for the first time is going to experience it. And what do you keep? What actually hits hard? What's impactful? What's funny? All of those things become muted after you watch a film 400 times. Things are less funny. Things are less emotionally impactful. They just are. And so, the doubt, I think, comes from this idea of like, I think this is funny, but maybe are other people going to, or I've seen this so many times, it's hard to tell. But you take breaks and you come back to it just to make sure it's fresh and everything like that. But yeah, I think we did a couple things in this film that are non-standard, maybe even a little risky in terms of sort of the journey we take people on. And we kind of tried to embed in our film a number of themes and emotions that it was no guarantee would resonate with people or that people would understand or see. And so the fact that the film struck a nerve with people in a positive way and hit home was really reassuring, but was by no means a sure thing. You never know for sure.
I think with the movie, since it is very much like the action part is so much of a time, it's almost great, but a shame that it was the time before camera phones.
Yeah. I mean, we found a lot of good footage considering the fact that it was not just before camera phones, but it's a water park. Yeah. So like taking electronics, this thing is a dicey. Yeah, exactly. Like, where are you going to put that thing? And everything got stolen. Oh, one of the things that's not in the film is how the employees, they were paid like minimum wage, like nothing. Like back then, like $3 an hour, right? In order to make up for the low pay, many of the supervisors, meaning like the 16-year-old kids, would effectively train the new employees on how to steal items from the cubbies when people were in rides as a way of augmenting low pay. So how to get your gold chain,
brilliant
wallet, the Air Jordan sneakers, all of those things. So theft was a big problem at the park. A lot of it was from employees who were just like, "How we get paid $3 an hour? What do you expect us to do?"
Yeah. I've got quite a serious question. So how did you get the family of George Larson involved? Because I think they were pivotal to the telling of the story and to bring out the honest nature of it.
Yes, they were important for us to kind of move on from the urban legend, the cartoon veneer, to the truth and the human toll, and understanding the duality of both action park, but also growing up in general. It's really as simple as we reached out to them. We had kind of done some investigating to try to find where they were, and we found that they had a roofing company. And we basically just in Florida, we basically just sent an email to their website of their company, and we got a phone call maybe 20 minutes later George Larson saying that not only do they have things they need to say, but that in the 39 years since the accident had occurred, nobody had once bothered to ask them or to reach out to them.
Right.
And that was astonishing to me, considering how much had been written about Action Park, how much had been said about Action Park, and how much of it was really going off of the legend that was sort of, let's just say, the victors oftentimes write the histories of things, right? And we found it very, very important to talk to them and understand what happened to them specifically, but then also, how was this incident made to go away? How was it covered up? How were they treated? How did this happen? And how does that differ from sort of what's out there in the milieu, in the culture and everything? And we realized that a lot of what had been said about this instance, which had been, talked about quite a bit in many of the histories of Action Park, was not only not true, but that I myself had gotten it wrong before. I had sort of just taken what I had seen about this and repeated it, and realizing that I myself was sort of complicit in sort of spreading these untruths. And I felt this a really important opportunity to sort of undo it, because the journey the movie takes you on is, again, my own personal journey from seeing this as this wacky, funny, hilarious place to also being a place of immense tragedy and heartache.
I think you absolutely nailed that. Like, especially from literally just having to rewatch it today. And since if we do have to go back and do another one, I can't imagine when you have to edit a movie how many times to rewatch. This would have been the third time I've seen it. Like, I do think, that journey comes across fantastically well.
Yeah, and I say when I rewatch the movie, I'll oftentimes skip over that particularly hard section, because even now I just feel my soul gets sucked out of my body. Like it's so like the pain, and this isn't my doing. It's what Esther Larson and Brian Larson brought to the table. Like, their emotions are so palpable, and being in a room with them when we had that interview, it was one of the most intense emotional experiences I'd ever had in my life. And I just knew that if 1% of that kind of came through on camera, people were going to feel something.
They were so honest. Yeah. They were so honest with sharing their pain.
Yeah.
And his brother, George's brother as well. It was genuinely moving. 4 minutes beforehand, I had to press pause because I was laughing so much.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I'm on this huge high, and you've dragged me down into the pit of despair. And as I said, I keep going back to it, the roller coaster of actually being on this documentary. It was beautiful the way you played with the emotions. It really was.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, if you take an elevator to the top floor, the fall is much harder. Is what we found. But also, what you mentioned, just a couple minutes, people kind of. It's interesting because people say it's a sudden kind of pin drop change in tone, but if you actually watch the movie, it's not. For the couple minutes prior to that, we say things that are, I think, categorically dark and disturbing, but you're still laughing at it because but the laughter you have is should I be laughing? Yeah. For a couple minutes, you start to question your own laughter. And I think if you watch it with multiple people, it'll be really interesting, because I bet some people say it's a theater and people have never seen it before. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we really haven't had this experience. But I imagine some people would be laughing and others will have stopped laughing. And at different points, the laughter sort of peters out. And then you get to that moment where you realize the laughter is over. But people, we start talking about the grave pool. Some people might laugh at that. Some people might find that horrific. We start talking about the kayak experience and in this way where it kind of feels like are they joking about it? You're not sure what's going on. And then we get to that moment when you realize, oh. And it kind of happens, I think, at a slightly different place for different viewers.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But watching it again this morning, the beginning 2 minutes, you set your stall out and go, this place was a bit fucked up.
Yeah, this
was really dangerous, and then it gets into the comedy.
Yes.
But you do say in the beginning, we tell you, there's some shit coming. You better prepare yourself.
We tell you everything you're going to experience in the opening scene of the movie. I mean, it ends with the line from Esther Larson saying, there's a place where death was tolerated, a place where death was written right into numbers. And that, I think, line, was obviously written before the pandemic, but I think it's one that resonates a lot now when people kind of say, how much death do we tolerate? For what? And I think a lot of the reason, serendipitously, the movie kind of came out in this state, in this climate, in this world right now, is because the questions it grapples with are ones we're all grappling with, which is, where do we sort of draw the line between this idea of freedom and fun versus responsibility and safety? And never has that question been more, I think, paramount than the past year. Oh, God, and exactly. And so the idea is what do we tolerate? At what cost? and realizing that's not something that was specific to then or now, but it's sort of an ongoing debate that we ourselves have as people, as society.
Like the world has become a class action park.
I mean, you're not the first person to say that. I mean, it's like one of the jokes I had was, and sometimes when movies come out in other countries, they'll rename it. They give it a title that might like make more sense to a local audience. And I was joking that when they release in other countries, they should just call it America Park. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about what this movie is. So, alternate title would have been America Park.
What were there any stories that just didn't make the cut?
Millions.
But then you were like, I'd love to put this in, but I just can't.
Oh, so many.
And if you can't talk about it, can you just talk about it on here? We can cut this
No,
bit out.
I mean, I'm not precious about anything, Like, I mean, I'll tell you anything you want to know. We could talk for hours just going through stories. Okay, so here's I think a story that gives you a really solid sense of who Gene was as a leader, as a manager, and as a member of his community. At one point, connected to the parking lot for the park, there was a restaurant that was kind of a mom and pop operation, like a locally owned restaurant. And you could access it by walking through a gate from the parking lot, right? So you could park at Action Park, grab a bite, and go to the park.
Right.
Well, that restaurant was closing down, and McDonald's wanted to take over the space and open up a McDonald's. Gene did not want McDonald's to open there. He didn't want this company moving in and eating into their concession sales, right? So they have a meeting at the town planning board or town council to evaluate the McDonald's proposal. And Gene sends his sort of attack dog director of operations to speak on his behalf about why McDonald's should not be allowed to open. And here's what he says. He says, here's what's going to happen if you allow McDonald's to open. That gate that allows people to safely walk from our parking lot to the restaurant, we're going to close that gate. In order to access it, people are going to have to walk on 94, meaning the highway that runs to the middle of the park, on the shoulder of the road, in ski boots, because remember, it's a ski resort, in ski boots, in the winter, on icy conditions. They will slip, they will fall, and they will die, and the blood will be on your hands if you allow McDonald's to open. And the town did not allow McDonald's to open. So that's how he exercised power. And I think the movie becomes, to some degree, a really interesting just story about how people consolidate and exercise power and how they make bad news go away, which is something, again, I think we all kind of think about now is how do powerful people get away with certain things? How do they make bad news go away? How do they steamroll through whatever meager guardrails we might have as a society to kind of keep things from happening? Another story, so we referenced very briefly in the film from one of the security guards talking about how he had heard that Gene kept a machine gun in his desk. Well, the full story, which he didn't have time to include, was that he had heard Gene had a machine gun in his desk, and he and a buddy broke into Gene's office in order to find the machine gun and play with it and like shoot up cans and shoot some trees for fun. The idea being that if Gene discovered it was missing or had been used, he wouldn't be able to report it because it was an illegal gun, right? Machine gun. Well, when he got to Gene's office and looked, the gun was missing. What I didn't discover until after the movie came out, speaking to another former employee, is why the gun was missing. Turns out this other employee had heard the same story and had the exact same idea, and just a couple weeks prior had broken into Gene's office, found his machine gun, shot up a bunch of cans and trees, exact same thing, and that one of his buddies had walked off with the gun. And that's why when this other guy came looking for Gene's gun, it was not there. Oh, another thing about Gene's office, he apparently had a button that was like a panic button that nobody knew where it went to. It did not go to the local police, but he had a button at his desk that he would press in an emergency. And to this day, nobody I speak to knows where that button went. So quite the character.
A good idea. Just a button. Yeah, just don't make me press the button.
There's nothing scarier than just a man at a desk pressing a button, I'll tell you. Here's another fun story. So there was a bungee tower at the park. I don't know if the story I'm about to tell you is how that bungee tower got there, but it relates to a bungee tower. Gene had, business partners and all sorts of ventures. And one of them was sort of on the Jersey Shore. They had some bungee towers on some of these beachside towns. And he had been on the outs with one of his business partners on a bungee tower. And maybe the guy owed him money, something like that. And so in the dead of night, Gene had some employees drive a van to that bungee tower, a truck, dismantle the entire bungee tower and steal the entire bungee tower. And I'm pretty sure the bungee tower at Action Park was this bungee tower that these guys stole in the middle of the night. Who steals a bungee tower? So, and that's not in the film. So
yeah, exactly. This Gene character is. I mean, again, it's so lovable, the roguish stuff you do. You almost go Gene character. Go, oh wait, yeah, remember what?
Yeah, and I think
he wasn't a good man.
He had interesting priorities, you know, that I don't think agree with everybody else's.
Is there anyone that you wish you did get for the doc that you didn't? Because one name that comes up a lot, and I don't know what he would have had to tell, was Bob Brennan is a big factor or a part of Gene.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't so involved with the day-to-day of the park. He was sort of the shadowy money man behind the scenes in a lot of things. And he's somebody, you know, he was in prison for a number of years he was a big penny stock guy, very Wolf of Wall Street. He was in jail much longer than a guy, Jordan from Wolf of Wall Street. He just isn't, you know, writing books about his experiences and kind of selling his movie rights and all that kind of stuff. But he was this like, he was on the cover of like Forbes magazine, like a big larger than life financial guy who had his first job was working for Gene, and they became friends and were involved with all sorts of shady business dealings. One of the newspapers we show in the film, the lawyers made us black it out, this particular detail, but you might see that in one point Gene threatened somebody with a Russian hitman, and that showed up for half a second in one of the newspaper clips, unless that was taken out in the UK version. I can't say for sure. But what was blacked out was that Gene specifically said that if this guy asks too many questions, he's going to get Bob Brennan to find a Russian hitman to take this guy out. And that was in 2012, I'll say. That was late in the game.
Wow.
That was not in the 80s. Wild story.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, bloody hell. I mean, that's the experience. Like, I'm laughing, but what the hell? You know, at the same time. Yeah.
So I know you got the film made yourself.
Yeah.
So did you go out there? How did you raise the funds for that?
So my friend Chris Charles Scott, who's my co-director and collaborator on the project, he and I figured out a way to make the film for very cheap. Without going into too many details, we didn't raise any funds. We just made it ourselves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you self-funded the lot, and you took a punt on it, basically.
Yeah, and you know, oftentimes that doesn't work out very well for people. So we're very grateful that we ended up with a film people wanted to see. Because you know,
are you surprised at the success that it's made? I mean, because we have to believe in the stuff we create, but are you surprised at how well people are just embracing your creation?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be, right? Like, I mean, there's like part of us hopes and dreams and prays and takes these risks because of the outside opportunity or chance that it would happen. But I don't think in our wildest dreams we imagined it would reach so many people and strike so many people in this very strong emotional way. And that's what we're grateful about. Not just, you know, just to have a movie out there that people can see would have been enough. You know, would have been the most satisfying and fulfilling thing that could happen to me in my lifetime. But to have it also mean something to people, to have our emotions, which are laid very raw in the film on screen, hit home with people in a way where the movie seems to mean something to people. That to me is just, you know, it's a project of a life and it's a dream and it's more than I ever could have imagined.
I thought you smashed it out of the park with it.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Pardon the poor British pun there. But what was I going to say? Is there anything else you got in the pipeline? Like, are you making more? Or is this just something near to your heart? And you went, we can do this as opposed
No, I'm
to
making more. I've got a bunch of stuff going. You know, I can't unfortunately talk about things that aren't yet announced, whatever else. But you know, keep your eyes out. I'll have. I'm working on my next movie. I'm directing. What I will say, to be very much a tease, is that, you know, if Action Park was my 80s movie, like my Goonies or Stand By Me, this is my 90s movie. So think about everything from like Point Break and Heat to Reality Bites, kind of like leaning into very much a 90s story and a 90s aesthetic.
Oh man,
I love Point Break. Point Break was what led me to become a skydiver. So
awesome. Yeah, that movie.
Oh
yeah. So.
Oh yeah, that changed my life. It was that or become a policeman after watching Die Hard. So it's just easier to become a skydiver.
Well, skydiving is as exciting as you think it will be in a movie. Being a policeman probably is not. I'll say.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
I know it looked like an easy job for the guy just sat in the car, just radioing in, going, "Damn it, McLean." The insurance company's going bankrupt.
Family matters. Damn it, McLean again. Yeah. So.
But so we won't keep you too much longer. But as a daft one for us, is there 3 documentaries you'd recommend people check out? Obviously not including.
Yeah, I'll give one in the past year that really I loved. That I don't want people to read anything about before they watch it. But it's called Bloody Noses, Empty Pockets. Have you guys heard of this film?
No.
Oh,
I'll put all of this in the show notes.
Yeah. So this film I just loved. It was the premise of it. Don't read anything beyond you can understand the basic premise, but don't read anything else about the making or anything. Was filmed over 24 hours in a dive bar in Las Vegas the last night it would be open, because bars in Vegas can be open 24 hours. So a 24-hour period, what happens in a bar in like a crummy dive filled with all sorts of elements of humanity sort of space there. And it's just and right now where I think a lot of people are very much missing the experience of, say, being in a bar and mingling with people who are strangers and weirdos and wackies, whatever else. It's a kind of movie that in the future I would just want to put on and have in the background and kind of feel like I'm at a bar.
Man.
Bloody Noses, Empty Pockets. Yeah, everybody should watch this movie.
Pockets. I want to watch that tonight, though. I'm so impatient.
I would like in that answer too. If you would ask a top musician who your favorite artist is, he's not going to go the A1 category.
Here's one you should check out.
Here's the one you should. That is fucking. I'm looking forward to checking that
Absolutely.
out. Thank you very much for that one.
I don't think it would play at Sundance last year. I don't think as many people saw it as it is due. I think it's a movie that I think hopefully a lot of people will really love. It's not for everybody. It's like, you're filming in a bar, like there's points but it feels very slice of life, even in the sense like I can't really hear what that person's saying, but I think it's interesting. You're at a bar, you hear every fourth word. It kind of feels like that sometimes. It's very much like the experience of being in this place.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to checking that one. But listen, unless you've got any more questions or anything you'd like to see, because we just don't want to take up too much of your time.
No, I love it, man. Happy to come back sometime in the future. I tell you guys, I've listened to a number of podcasts talking about Class Action Park, and yours was the one I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Especially because since it came out in the UK, hearing people apply Britishisms to this movie has been so much fun. People calling it mental or crackers or whatever you guys want to call it, because you can use so many words as synonyms for mad that we don't have in the States, and hearing every one of them applied to this movie has been a lot of fun. So
thank you very much.
It really was great fun. And thanks for reaching out. I'm just curious, what grabbed your attention about my tweet where you
was your tweet, man?
Oh, hang on. No, but you must see a lot of tweets about your. And this is purely from a selfish marketing point of view.
No, it wasn't the tweet. It was listening to the podcast and how much fun you guys were having. It was just like you guys were having so much fun. I was like, wow, they're having so much fun. I would love to talk about my movie with people who are having fun, especially because like a lot of the communal experience about talking about film has not been there this year, and so maybe some people are very like, oh, I gotta talk about this movie again, but Action Park is such a fun subject and such a fun topic to talk about. Even for me, after years of studying it and working on it and producing this film, I'm still not sick of the topic, and so you guys just seemed like a really fun crew to talk about it with.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks for coming on. That really genuinely was.
Anytime, man.
That was a pleasure. And you've raised my household IQ just by being here by at least 50%. So thanks. That was just
cool. Awesome. Well, happy to be here, guys, and thanks for everything. Appreciate it.
All right, good luck, man. Take it easy.
Cheers, sir. Ta-da.
Bye.